Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. In Doha, the Afghan government and the Taliban have reached a preliminary deal to press on with the peace talks. This is their first written agreement in 19 years of war. The deal is being considered a major breakthrough as it would allow negotiators to move on to more substantive issues, including talks on a ceasefire. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi says the global community must realize that the unresolved Kashmir dispute will keep haunting peace in South Asia. He was addressing a forum on international order in a post-pandemic world through video link. Qureshi said the dispute remains the oldest unresolved international conflict on the UN agenda. He added that India continues to violate human rights of 8 million Kashmiris who have been besieged despite the coronavirus pandemic. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has announced the establishment of the first special economic zone in Gilgit, Baltistan. Addressing the oath-taking ceremony of the GB cabinet, Khan says work is underway to grant provisional provincial status to the region. The Prime Minister also announced a complete health coverage for the locals. Britain has approved the world's first COVID-19 vaccine by Pfizer-BioNTech for rollout from next week. The US says it has made preparations to enable the immediate mass shipment of vaccines. Meanwhile, from 5 Chinese vaccine candidates, 4 have reached phase 3 of clinical trials before seeking regulatory approval. Pakistan has already approved funds to buy a vaccine against COVID-19, which has claimed over 8,100 lives in the country. The global death toll by the new coronavirus has exceeded 1.48 million, with over 63.8 million infections. Israel has edged towards an early election, its 4th in 2 years after the parliament gave approval to a bill to dissolve itself. Tabled by the opposition, the bill was supported by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's main coalition partner, Benny Gantz. The bill still needs to pass through 3 future votes to become law. The UN has signed a deal with the Ethiopian government to allow unimpeded humanitarian access to the embattled Tigray region. This will allow aid to reach the region, which has been cut off during fighting that began a month ago between federal troops and the Tigray rebels. And in football, Liverpool have qualified for the knockout stage of the Champions League after beating Ajax 1-0 at home. Curtis Jones scored his first goal of the league at Anfield to give a crucial victory to his team in the Group D clash. Those were the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. In Doha, the Afghan government and the Taliban have reached a preliminary deal to press on with the peace talks. This is their first written agreement in 19 years of war. The agreement lays out the way forward for further discussions, but is considered a breakthrough as it will allow the negotiators to move on to more substantive issues, including talks on a ceasefire. A statement by a member of the Afghan negotiating team says the preamble of the talks has been finalized. The Taliban spokesman confirms the same on Twitter. Pakistan has welcomed the development, saying it's an important step towards a successful outcome of intra-Afghan negotiations. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi says the global community must realize that the unresolved Kashmir dispute will keep haunting peace in South Asia. He was addressing a forum on international order in a post-pandemic world through video link. Qureshi said the dispute remains the oldest unresolved international conflict on the UN agenda. He added that India continues to violate human rights of 8 million Kashmiris who have been besieged despite the coronavirus pandemic. The foreign minister said the world needs internationalism more than ever as the pandemic has exposed flaws in international organizations. The foreign ministers of Turkey and Finland also took part in the discussion, which was organized by the Turkish media. In India, the talks between the centre and the farmers demanding a revision of the controversial farm laws ended inconclusively. The protesters and the government agreed to meet again on Thursday. Mass protests continue as the deadlock on the ground persists. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government passed laws ending its mandatory procurement of produce at fixed rates. The farmers say the three laws are a death decree for farmers as they will be exploited by big corporations. Farmers have rejected the expert committees set up by the Modi government, saying such panels have never led to any outcome. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has announced to establish the first special economic zone in Gilgit-Baltistan. Khan says the government will focus on promoting tourism in the region. Addressing the oath-taking ceremony of GB cabinet, PM Khan said the work is underway to grant provisional provincial status to the region. The Prime Minister also announced a complete health coverage for the people of Gilgit-Baltistan. Khan says 1 million rupees will be allocated for each household for availing medical treatment at any hospital. He says the government will also develop skiing areas in the region to promote tourism. Britain has approved the world's first COVID-19 vaccine by Pfizer-BioNTech for rollout from next week. The US says it has made preparations to enable the immediate mass shipment of vaccines. Meanwhile, from 5 Chinese vaccine candidates, 4 have reached phase 3 of the clinical trials before seeking regulatory approval. Global death toll by the coronavirus has exceeded 1.48 million, with over 63.8 million infections.
With critical breakthroughs in COVID-19 vaccine developments, countries have started preparing for immunization drives. Brazil has decided to vaccinate its indigenous people and health workers first, as the country recorded 697 fatalities overnight. The nationwide death toll has crossed 173,000, while in the United States, an advisory panel of the Centers for Disease Control has recommended that nursing homes and health workers be immunized first. Hospitals across the country have started making necessary arrangements for vaccine deployment.
So we are very fortunate at the Jackson Health System. We are expecting the COVID-19 vaccine. We have the -80 refrigeration freezer needed to store the vaccine. We are expecting the vaccine in mid-December. So we are ready to make sure that we are deploying the vaccine to our employees.
Meanwhile, the European Union has also given a clear time frame to its members for the start of their vaccination programs. Germany is preparing vaccination centers across the country for the launch of its immunization drive in the first quarter of 2021. And in Asia, India's coronavirus death toll has surged to over 138,000, with more than 9.4 million cases. November proved to be the deadliest month for the Indian capital, New Delhi, with over 100 daily fatalities. But New Delhi says not everyone will need to be vaccinated.
Our purpose is to break the chain of virus transmission. So if we are able to vaccinate a critical mass of people and break that virus transmission, then we may not have to vaccinate the entire population.
Japan has approved a bill to provide vaccination free of charge, with its majority elderly population extremely vulnerable to the virus.
Pakistan has recorded 75 more deaths from COVID-19, pushing the toll to 8,166. This is the country's highest daily deaths since July.
The health ministry says 2,829 infections were reported overnight. The country has recorded 403,000 infections so far, out of which more than 345,000 people have recovered. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Imran Khan has called for national collective efforts to fight the second wave. Presiding over a meeting of the federal cabinet, the Prime Minister asked for timely purchase of coronavirus vaccine. The cabinet has approved a $150 million grant to procure vaccines, with healthcare workers and the elderly a priority.
Ethiopia and the UN have reached an agreement to allow aid into government-held areas of the restive Tigray region. UN spokesman Saviano Abaru says an assessment mission will begin later today. The agreement will allow food, medicines and other aid into the region that has seen a rising hunger during the conflict. This comes a month after deadly conflict cut off the region from the rest of the world, where federal troops declared victory against local forces last week. But the rebels remain defiant, saying their war is not over yet. The UN says a two-state solution is the only premise for a just, lasting and comprehensive peace between Israelis and Palestinians. UN General Assembly President Volkan Bozkır was addressing the Legislative Committee on the Rights of the Palestinians. He criticized Israel's attempts to erode the status of Jerusalem, threats of annexation and the inhumane blockade of Gaza. He said these recurring activities severely curtail the fundamental rights and the freedoms of the Palestinians. Bozkır asserted that the rights of the Palestinians are not up for negotiations. He said only constructive negotiations between the parties and adherence to the UN resolution will bring about a durable solution. Israel has edged towards an early election, its fourth in 2 years after Parliament gave approval to a bill to dissolve itself. Tabled by the opposition, the bill was supported by Netanyahu's main coalition partner, Benny Gantz. Gantz's decision comes out of frustration over the government's failure to pass a budget for 2021. His Blue and White Party has accused Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of putting his own legal interests over those of the country. Speaking to the media, Gantz said Netanyahu has decided to dissolve the government and drag Israel into an election. The bill still needs to pass through 3 future votes to become a law. The US and Turkey take aim at each other during a virtual meeting of NATO foreign ministers. The outgoing US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo accused Turkey of aggravating tensions in the Mediterranean. Pompeo said Ankara gave a gift to the Kremlin by purchasing a Russian anti-aircraft missile system. Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu fired back at Pompeo, accusing him of urging European allies to forge an alliance against Turkey. Ankara's top diplomat said Washington was blindly siding with Athens, escalating regional tensions. Çavuşoğlu also accused the US of backing Kurdish terrorist organizations in Syria. The meeting was primarily intended to focus on a new report on how NATO should adapt for the next decade. Russian President Vladimir Putin says Belarus is facing unprecedented meddling by external forces. Speaking at an online meeting, he said the opposition in Belarus must try to resolve their differences through talks. Putin said the Belarusian people have the political maturity to build a domestic political dialogue. Belarus has been rocked by mass protests since the disputed presidential election of August the 9th. Moscow has backed Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko throughout the turmoil and last week sent its foreign minister to Minsk to urge constitutional reforms. Japan has slammed Russia's deployment of its S-300 missile defense systems on a chain of disputed islands. Cabinet Secretary Katsunobu Kato says Tokyo has protested with Moscow. The Russians seized the islands at the end of the World War II. A territorial row has prevented Japan and Russia from signing a formal peace treaty. Tokyo has repeatedly lodged similar protests against Russia, military drills and internet expansion, which Moscow has rejected. It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Thai Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha has survived a legal challenge that could have seen him thrown out of office. The Constitutional Court ruled that he was not guilty of conflict of interest by living in an army residence after leaving the military. The head judge says status of Prayut as Prime Minister and Defence Minister remains unchanged. The court ruled that his status as Premier entitled him to live in the house even though he stepped down as Army Chief in 2014. The ruling will inflame the pro-democracy movement that has shaken Thailand since July, calling for Prayut to quit. But the movement is also facing legal action, with 5 key leaders charged earlier under Thailand's royal defamation laws. U.S. President Donald Trump's campaign has filed a petition challenging Wisconsin's presidential vote results. The swing state certified President-elect Joe Biden as the winner after a recount in 2 counties. The petition was filed as Attorney General William Barr discredited Trump's claims of mass electoral fraud in the election. Barr says the Justice Department has found no evidence of fraud on a scale that could have affected a different outcome in the election. The Trump campaign has said the Justice Department did not conduct a thorough investigation. Meanwhile, President-elect Joe Biden marches towards presidential transition, forging his administration. Unveiling his team of economic advisors, Biden named former Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen as U.S. Treasury Secretary. In India, 8 people have been killed in a road accident in the northern Uttar Pradesh state. Police say 2 people sustained injuries and are undergoing treatment at a local hospital. The accident in Kanshobi district occurred after a sand-laden truck overturned and fell on an SUV. 10 occupants of the car were returning from a wedding. Police say security and rescue officials have arrived at the scene and are taking appropriate action. Sri Lanka has evacuated 75,000 people from homes on the east coast where tropical cyclone Burevi is expected to hit. The country's disaster management center has advised those living near its path to stay indoors. Officials say evacuees from the Trincomalee district have been moved into 237 relief centers. The country's Met Department said the cyclone's path will carry it northwest towards the Arabian Sea by Thursday. Burevi is projected to move into southern India by Friday, though it is expected to cause less damage there. New Zealand has declared a climate emergency, pledging a carbon-neutral government by 2025. In the motion, the country's parliament acknowledging an alarming decline of species and global biodiversity. Addressing the parliament, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern termed climate change one of the greatest challenges of our time. Ardern said Wellington had to act with urgency. She mentioned that the government sector will be required to buy only electric or hybrid vehicles. The fleet will be reduced over time by 20% and all 200 coal-fired boilers used in public buildings will be phased out.
As a government, we are also announcing the Carbon Neutral Government Program that requires government organisations to be carbon neutral by 2025. We must get our own house in order. How can we stand and take a leadership position amongst the private sector unless we take the same action that we expect of them? It will require government agencies to measure and reduce their emissions, and if they are unable to achieve carbon neutrality, they must offset.
In Australia, massive bushfires have forced thousands of tourists to flee to northeastern Fraser Island. Nearly half the island has been scorched during the first major heat wave of the season. Clouds of smoke could be seen rising from the island's tropical rainforests. The Queensland State Fire Department says over 1 million litres of water and fire retardant gel have been dropped so far. In a statement, the emergency services said conditions were unpredictable and could change rapidly. The blaze on Fraser Island was sparked by an illegal campfire 6 weeks ago. A rare skeleton of a saber-toothed cat is expected to fetch between 60,000 and 80,000 Swiss francs at an auction next week. The skeleton is estimated to be some 37 million years old. More on this report.
In Switzerland, centuries-old skeleton of a prehistoric predatory mammal is all set to be sold at an auction house Piguet. The fossilized skeleton discovered in the rocky badlands of South Dakota belongs to a robust animal which hunted horses and small rhinoceros.
Il y a vraiment un grand intérêt du public.
There is really huge interest from public in general for everything related to dinosaurs and prehistory. And I think it's because of the numerous films and video games that came out in recent years.
The primitive skeleton mounted on a piece of wood is prepared to be the star lot among 40 others at the auction on December 8. According to the head of Swiss-based seller, the specimen was better than others which have come in recent years.
C'est la nouveauté, c'est quelque chose qui n'existe pas depuis très longtemps, ça s'est développé.
It's new. It's something we haven't seen for a long time. It has developed over the last 5 years, maybe a little bit more. Big collectors start to drive up prices of exceptional pieces such as this kind of animal. It is universal dimension, no religion, no culture. It speaks to all of us wherever we come from. It's from before our time, and I think it's one of the rare artistic sectors which really has no borders.
The auction dedicated to paleontology is hoping to attract online bidders.
An Indonesian man is making cosplay costumes for cats. He sells them online to transform felines into superheroes, fashionistas in hijabs, or even cobblers. More in this report.
After quitting his job as a school teacher, an Indonesian entrepreneur tried his hand at a number of businesses. He finally stumbled upon one unusual occupation. Although it may not be haute couture, Freddy Lugina Priyadi found a lucrative market for cat fashion. Priyadi set up his online business 3 years ago and earns up to $210 a month if he sells at least 4 pieces a day.
My cousins who love cats gave me the idea to make these costumes. And at first I thought it was weird. Why do animals need to wear clothes? But it turned out to be funny to see them wearing costumes.
Freddy has also faced backlash on social media from people questioning if he is trying to give human qualities to animals. But he insists the costumes are just for fun and advises buyers not to make their pets wear an outfit for too long. One customer bought at least 30 different outfits for her cats and places orders for special occasions like Eid or Christmas.
It's for fun only. Sogan has a TikTok account, and looking at pictures of cats wearing costumes like these can help to relieve our stress. And I, as the owner, can have fun with the cat. After all, my cat tends to be quiet and happy.
This sounds fun, but in the wake of a boom in social media posts of pets dressed up, some animal welfare groups have issued guidelines to try to make owners more aware of any signs it may be causing their pets distress.
Well, Singapore has become the first country in the world to approve sale of lab-grown meat by a US startup. The country's food agency said it thoroughly reviewed manufacturing control and safety testing data before granting the approval. The company just says its so-called clean meat does not come from slaughtered animals. Company co-founder and CEO Josh Tetrick said the meat will be priced at the premium chicken rate. Demand for alternatives to regular meat is soaring globally due to health, animal welfare, and environment concerns. In Puerto Rico, a massive telescope at Arecibo Observatory that has been deteriorating since August has collapsed. The telescope aided 57 years of astronomical discoveries. The U.S. National Science Foundation says the radio telescope's 900-ton instrument platform fell yesterday. It added no injuries were reported. 2 cables supporting the reflector dish had broken since August, causing damage and forcing officials to close the observatory. The telescope was one of the largest in the world. It was used to study distant planets, potentially hazardous asteroids, and potential signatures of extraterrestrial life. In a historic first, a Chinese probe has completed the drilling, sampling, and sealing of lunar soil after successfully landing on the moon's surface. Details in this report.
China was late to the space race. It did not send its first satellite into orbit until 1970, but it has caught up fast. In a first such attempt by any country in 40 years, Beijing launched a mission to return moon samples to Earth. Now the Chang'e 5 probe is gathering samples from the moon's surface as planned. Earlier, the China National Space Administration said the Chang'e 5 probe successfully landed on the near side of the moon.
This movement is the first step. It steadily landed on the surface, very steady and very good. It lays a very important foundation for the next drilling and collecting.
The material will provide further understanding of the geological evolution of the moon. It will provide necessary information for better understanding the solar activity. Last year, the Chang'e 4 probe touched down on the far side of the moon, the first space probe from any nation to do so. This time, the probe selected the site and touched down on the north of the Mons Riumker in Oceanus Procellarum, also known as the Ocean of Storms.
Although we have done the landing twice before this mission, this time the lander is heavier than the U-2 lunar rover, and so it is harder to control it with a higher requirement for its precision.
If successful, the mission will make China the third nation to have retrieved lunar samples after the US and the Soviet Union.
More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned. And other business updates, Iran's government has presented a draft budget of over $33 billion to the parliament. The state media said the budget holds promises of less reliance on oil revenues and higher growth despite US sanctions. It said this year's budget is lower than the $38 billion budget for the last year. The country's media said the budget bill focuses on infrastructure reforms, health and non-oil exports. In a televised speech, President Hassan Rouhani said Iran expected to sell more oil next year, with plans to sell state properties for revenue. US sanctions have crippled Tehran's economy, especially after Washington exited Iran's nuclear deal of 2015. The Wall Street stocks have slipped at open as Labor Department data showed fewer jobs addition in November. This has added to concerns about the pressure on the economy. November's rally was bolstered by positive vaccine news from several pharmaceutical companies. Nasdaq Composite Index traded nearly 1% lower. The Dow Jones Industrial Average was at over 0.5% down, while S&P 500 also declined marginally. Meanwhile, oil prices dropped on a surprise build-up in the US inventories and a delay in OPEC Plus meeting. As the Brexit transition deadline approaches, the Netherlands has let out a monster to warn truckers to get ready for Britain's exit from the EU and all that it entails. More in this report.
Although Britain technically left the European Union at the start of 2020, there has been a one-year grace period before the introduction of traffic controls, now set to begin. The Netherlands, one of Britain's closest trading partners, brought out the Brexit Monster due to concerns the coronavirus pandemic has reduced awareness around Britain's departure.
If you're looking at the 1st of January, then a deal or no deal is for the port operations not relevant, especially not on the short term. Because from the 1st of January on, the UK ends the transition period and the internal market ends. And from that date on, all custom formalities and sanitary and phytosanitary formalities have to be in place.
Around 40 million tons of goods are shipped between the Netherlands and Britain every year via Rotterdam port. It is also the main hub for cargo passing from other EU member states to Britain.
Around 3,000 or 4,000 trucks are coming in or going out to or from the UK, and we expect that around 100 or 200 trucks in the beginning, in the first weeks after 1st of January, won't have all the custom formalities in order and have to leave for a temporary parking place.
The Netherlands, the Eurozone's fifth largest economy, expects to incur $2.7 billion in direct costs by 2023 as a result of Brexit.
A look into the world of sports now. Liverpool have qualified for the knockout stage of the Champions League after beating Ajax 1-0 at home. Tuesday's encounters in the Champions League were crucial in deciding the final round of 16. More in this report.
As the knockout stage approaches, the UEFA Champions League is heating up. Curtis Jones scored his first Champions League goal at Anfield to give a crucial victory to the Reds in the Group D clash. In another group match, Midtjylland drew 1-1 with Atlanta for their first point in the tournament this season. In Group B, Shakhtar Donetsk shocked Real Madrid 2-0. In the other Group B clash, Inter Milan beat Mönchengladbach 3-2 in a thoroughly entertaining encounter. Atletico Madrid could only draw 1-1 against Bayern at home, following a late penalty from Thomas Müller. FC Porto and Manchester City advanced to the next phase after the two played out a goalless draw in Group C.
One more member of Pakistan cricket team has tested positive for COVID-19, taking the overall tally of infections to 8. 6 of the 53-member squad had tested positive upon their arrival in New Zealand, while another case detected last week. New Zealand's health ministry says the team is not allowed to train. it will remain on hold pending consideration by health officials. The Pakistan Cricket Board says all those who return negative tests are expected to be able to train in managed isolation. The first T20 is slated for the 18th of December at Auckland, where the last test will be played at Christchurch on 3rd of January. South Africa paceman Kagiso Rabada has been ruled out for the one-day series against England after sustaining a right adductor strain. He is expected to take 3 weeks to recover. The pacer has been released from the squad and the biosecure environment in place for the England tour. Cricket South Africa said this release will ensure his rehabilitation ahead of the Test series against Sri Lanka. South Africa play 3 ODIs against England starting this weekend. That's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News.